It was just after noon in a dusty open-air market on the edge of Souk El Had, a rural town where livestock and street animals are traded like second-hand goods. Among the noise of shouting vendors, clanging metal, and flapping tarps, most people were too busy to notice the chain tied around a cracked pillar near the far end of the stalls. But Leila, a local animal rescuer, saw it instantly. While others walked past the noise and chaos of the market with barely a glance, her eyes moved differently. Searching, always scanning the shadows where the forgotten ones usually hid. She had grown up in this very village. The dusty market paths, the smell of livestock and grilled corn, the echo of bartering voices, they were part of her childhood. Her father, a quiet man with weathered hands, had once sold goats here every weekend. Leila would sit on a wooden crate beside him, watching the animals with quiet fascination, learning to understand their eyes long before she ever opened a book on veterinary science. But life had taken her far from these familiar stalls. She left for the capital when she was 18, determined to become more than just a girl who loved animals. She studied veterinary medicine, worked long shifts at clinics, and saw up close the kind of cruelty poverty and ignorance could breed. Still, she never forgot where she came from. She always knew she'd return. And she did, with a mission that burned in her bones, to build a shelter, no matter how small, where the voiceless had a second chance. A place not just of treatment, but of dignity. Every Sunday, without fail, Leila returned to the same market. Not to shop, not to browse, but to intervene. She moved with quiet purpose, weaving through crowds and livestock pens with eyes trained to spot the ones who didn't belong. The sick, the broken, the chained, the free-to-take dogs tied behind stalls like afterthoughts. She knew the places most people didn't look. She knew that suffering rarely stood in the open. It crouched behind tarp-covered cages and under sun-beaten crates, waiting. And today, like so many days before, Leila had found what others had missed. That day, what she saw stopped her cold. In the far corner of the market, half hidden behind a stack of cracked plastic crates, was a mother dog, barely more than a skeleton wrapped in fur. Her coat was patchy, mangy in places, and her belly sagged, stretched from a recent litter. She lay slumped on her side in the dirt, her body curled inward, as if trying to disappear into herself. She was chained to a crooked metal post, not with a collar, but with a loop of rusted steel wire that bit into her neck every time she moved. It was wound tightly, more like a trap than a tether. The flies swarmed around her, undisturbed by her stillness. She wasn't barking. She wasn't growling. In fact, she wasn't doing anything at all. Her legs were folded under her as if they had given up. Her head rested limply on the ground, eyes half open but vacant. Dull. Sunken. The kind of eyes that had seen too much and hoped for too little. There was no struggle left in her, not even the energy to flinch when people walked by. It wasn't just exhaustion, it was surrender. And that, more than anything, broke Leila's heart. Next to her, a small puppy stood, just old enough to have weaned, but far too young to survive on his own. His body was tiny, fragile, and covered in dust. His ears drooped slightly, his fur patchy from fleas and poor nutrition. But his spirit hadn't broken. Not yet. Every time someone passed too close, he barked. A hoarse, dry sound that barely rose above a whisper, but it was full of desperation and defiance. He didn't run. He didn't hide. Instead, he stepped forward, placing himself between the strangers and his mother like a tiny, trembling shield. His legs wobbled from exhaustion, shaking beneath him as he planted his feet. He had no strength, no backup, no plan. but he stood anyway. His ribs stuck out sharply, each breath making them rise and fall beneath the paper-thin skin stretched too tightly over his frame. And still, he held the line. Still, he watched everyone with wide, frightened eyes, but he did not back down. He stood like a soldier, a starving, frightened little soldier, who only knew one mission: protect Mama. A man sat nearby, drinking tea and scrolling through his phone. "How much for the dog?" Leila asked. "For the little one?" "400 dinari. The mama's free. Just take her off my hands," he replied without looking up. Leila clenched her jaw, her fists tightening at her sides. She'd seen this story too many times before. In this part of the country, female dogs were rarely seen as companions. They were tools, expected to breed, guard, and survive. Once they gave birth, their value dropped to nothing. Most were chained in backyards with no shelter, left without food for days, or sold off again and again for breeding until their bodies gave out. A few were simply abandoned to die. This wasn't neglect. It was a routine. The man sitting beside the dog sipped his tea and spoke casually, like he was talking about a broken chair. "Saw him near an old farmhouse just off Route 9, he said, without looking up. "Mama was tied out back. Pup was hiding under a pile of wood." Leila didn't need more details. She could fill in the blanks. The mother had probably been bought or picked up to serve as a makeshift guard dog, tied outside a crumbling home to bark at strangers. No one had trained her, loved her, or even given her a name. She had been a presence, not a pet, a shadow that barked. And when she got pregnant, they kept her around just long enough for the pups to be born, just long enough to sell the litter for pocket change. Only this one had survived. The others had likely died, been sold off too soon, or simply disappeared. And now, the mother was no longer useful. "She's free," the vendor said, shrugging. "You can take her if you want, or not." Leila didn't hesitate. She handed over the cash. The vendor shrugged and took another sip of tea. As she crouched to unhook the wire, the puppy growled, his tail tucked, his eyes wild with fear. She paused, letting him sniff her hand, then gently stroked his muddy face. Only when she touched his mother's paw did he step back, eyes wide, unsure what to do. With help from a market boy she often hired, she carried both dogs into her beat-up van. They didn't resist. They were too tired to fight. She named the mother Arizona for her resilience under the sun, and the puppy Texas, because he was tiny, but stood like something much bigger. The drive to her shelter, Beit El Kalb, took nearly 40 minutes, and both dogs were silent the entire way. Arizona's breathing was shallow. Texas curled up beside her, resting his head on her neck. He didn't sleep, though. His little eyes stayed open the whole time, watching her chest rise and fall. At the clinic, the news wasn't good. Arizona had severe anemia, dehydration, and internal infections. Her organs were shutting down from malnutrition. Texas had early-stage pneumonia and was dangerously underweight. His lungs crackled. His temperature was low, but he was still stronger than he looked. "They've probably been starving for over a week," the vet said. But the pup, he didn't leave her side. That kind of bond? You don't see it often. That night, Leila stayed at the shelter, sleeping on a mat near their crate. She fed Texas with a bottle of puppy formula, and as soon as he had strength, he crawled back to his mother, licking her face gently. Arizona, weak as she was, blinked softly in response. She couldn't lift her head, but she tried to move her paw closer to him. For 2 days, they held on together. Leila wrapped Arizona in warm towels and massaged her limbs. She sat with Texas for hours, playing calming music and whispering to him as he curled in her lap. On the third day, Arizona stood up, wobbly but upright. She wagged her tail once, just once. Texas barked and bounced in excitement. There was hope. By the end of the week, Arizona was standing more regularly, even walking a few steps to eat. She rested in a heated room filled with soft blankets. Texas would race around the shelter in bursts of energy, then return to nuzzle into her side. They were getting better. Until they weren't. But just as the light in her eyes had started to return, Arizona began to fade again. She stopped eating. At first, Layla thought it was just exhaustion, but within a day, her breathing had grown shallow and irregular. She tried to drink water, but couldn't keep it down. Her body trembled even when lying still, as if she were constantly bracing for something unseen. Worried, Layla rushed her back to the clinic. The blood work came back quickly. The vet's face was somber. "The infection spread," he said softly, glancing at the chart. "It's in her kidneys now. Her body's shutting down. She's fighting. But—" He hesitated, then met Layla's eyes. "She's tired, Layla. Really tired." Layla didn't respond. She just nodded once, biting the inside of her cheek to hold herself together. That evening, she brought Texas into the quiet, dim room where Arizona lay wrapped in warm blankets. The lights were low. A soft lullaby played from an old speaker nearby. Layla gently placed Texas beside his mother. At first, the little pup just stared at her, unsure. But then he crept forward, pressing his nose into the curve of her neck. He licked her cheek slowly, carefully, like he had done every night since the rescue. Then he curled himself tightly into the crook of her belly, his favorite spot, the safest place he had ever known. And there he stayed. He didn't sleep. He didn't play. He just lay still, his tiny chest rising and falling, his wide eyes blinking slowly in the dark. Sometimes he whimpered softly, pressing his paw into her side as if trying to wake her gently. Layla didn't leave either. She stayed curled up in the corner of the room, watching over them, whispering words too quiet to hear. She couldn't bear to interrupt the moment, just in case it was the last. And in the soft gray light of morning, Arizona slipped away. No sound, no struggle, just stillness. Her head fell to the side slightly and her breathing stopped. Texas stirred. He lifted his head, nudged her with his nose, then licked her ear. Once, twice, and waited. Waited for her to move. Waited for her to blink. Waited for the warmth to return. But nothing came. After a while, he lowered himself again, curling into her side one final time. Still. Silent. Small. Layla sobbed as she wrapped Arizona's body. She buried her under an olive tree just outside the shelter, placing a handmade wooden marker with her name carved in it. Texas fell into a deep depression. He wouldn't eat. He barely moved. He refused to leave the spot where his mother had last slept. Layla stayed by his side every night. She played recordings of Arizona's breathing, hoping the rhythm might comfort him. She fed him by hand, whispered to him, and wrapped him in blankets that still carried her scent. Eventually, Texas began to heal, but not all at once. It started with the smallest things. One morning, Layla noticed him lift his head a little earlier than usual, his ears twitching at the distant sound of birdsong. He didn't get up, not yet, but he watched. That was new. Later that week, he wandered a few steps beyond the shade of the porch, sniffing at the air as if relearning the world one scent at a time. The grass tickled his paws. A falling leaf brushed against his nose, and for a second, his head tilted with innocent curiosity. He barked. It wasn't loud or brave. It was almost confused. but it was there. A spark. One afternoon, as Layla sat on the step tossing a faded red ball for the shelter dogs, she felt a nudge against her ankle. It was Texas. He looked up at her, unsure. She gently rolled the ball toward him. He flinched, then took a step back, but something made him pause. His eyes followed the ball as it wobbled into the grass. Then he chased it. His legs were clumsy. He stumbled once, slid on the grass, but didn't stop. And when he caught up to the ball, he pounced on it with both front paws like he'd done it 100 times before. For a moment, just a heartbeat, he looked like a normal puppy again. Not the orphan, not the quiet shadow in the corner. Just Texas, young, alive, hopeful. And when he turned back to Layla, the tiniest smile on his face and the ball proudly in his mouth, she knew. He was finding his way back. When the vet finally cleared Texas for adoption, it should have been a joyful moment. And it was, but not without a heavy pause. Layla stood at the edge of the yard, watching him chase butterflies beneath the olive tree, his tail wagging, his bark sharper, more confident now. He was healthy, strong, playful. He was ready. But she wasn't sure she was. She had told herself from the beginning that this was temporary, that she was just helping him recover, helping him survive. But somewhere between the midnight feedings and the whispered reassurances during thunderstorms, between the tears shed at his mother's grave and the day he finally played with the red ball, he had taken root in her heart. Still, she knew what she had to do. Texas deserved a clean slate, a new home without shadows, a future that wasn't shaped by tragedy. He deserved more than rescue. He deserved a real life. A few weeks later, Fatima arrived. She was soft-spoken, dressed in warm tones, and carried the quiet sadness of someone who had recently said goodbye. Her elderly Labrador, Sammy, had passed just a month before. They'd been together 13 years. Her house, once filled with routine and gentle noise, had grown far too silent. "I don't want to replace him," she told Layla, her voice catching. "But I have space again, in my home and in my heart." Texas didn't approach her at first. He sat by the kennel door, watching her quietly, unsure. But Fatima waited. She sat down on the floor, speaking softly, offering him a toy and a piece of boiled chicken. After some time, Texas cautiously stepped forward, then crawled into her lap. It was a sign. Layla hesitated. She had raised him from the edge of despair. But Fatima's home was warm, her heart gentle, and Texas seemed to relax in her arms. With mixed feelings, Layla completed the adoption papers and said goodbye, hugging him tightly one last time. "Be good, Habibi. You deserve the world." At first, everything seemed perfect, almost too perfect. Fatima kept Layla updated like clockwork. She sent photos every few days. Texas curled up on a soft knitted blanket by the window, the afternoon sun warming his fur. In another, he was sprawled belly up beside her elderly cat, Bamboo, who surprisingly tolerated his playful nudges. Sometimes he'd be pictured exploring the little park behind Fatima's apartment, tail up, ears perked, nose in the grass, as if discovering the world all over again. Each message made Layla smile with relief. Texas was safe. He was loved. He was moving on. But then, 2 weeks in, the messages stopped. At first, Layla didn't think much of it. Maybe Fatima was busy. Maybe life had simply gotten in the way. But by the third silent day, something gnawed at her. And then the call came. Fatima called in tears. She had taken him out for a short walk, but he slipped the leash during a loud firecracker blast and bolted down the road. Volunteers, neighbors, and even police helped look. Days passed. No sign. Layla didn't sleep. She printed posters. She searched the roads leading out of town. And finally, one early morning, she returned to the place that had started it all, the olive tree behind the shelter, where Arizona had been buried. There, curled in the shade, lay Texas, covered in dust, thin, silent. His nose rested against the dirt where his mother lay. He hadn't moved in hours. Layla approached slowly, her heart pounding. "Texas," she whispered. His ears twitched. He turned his head slightly, then slowly lifted himself and stumbled toward her. When he reached her, he collapsed into her lap, completely still, as if finally safe. She sobbed, wrapping her arms around him. "You came home," she said. "You never left her, did you?" Fatima agreed without hesitation. "I think he was always yours," she told Layla over the phone. "He found his way back to you. That means something." And so, Texas stayed. Not in the kennel, but in Layla's own cottage behind the shelter. She built him a small bed next to hers, filled it with plush toys, and placed a framed photo of Arizona nearby. Texas began to thrive again. He gained weight. His tail wagged more often. He played with the other rescues, helped calm new pups who were afraid. And every evening before dinner, he still visited that tree. Just for a moment. He never forgot. But he found a new chapter. Layla did too. In saving Texas, she had also been saved. Thank you for witnessing Texas's journey. A story of loyalty, loss, and the love that brings us home. If his story moved you, please like the video, subscribe for more rescue stories, and consider supporting local shelters who fight for animals no one else sees.